Peace. Give thanks. I give thanks. I'm making this recording summarizing my complaint with the United Nations against the British and Canadian Crown, Canada, Ontario, and the Premier in connection with their orders under the Emergency Management and Civil Protections Act, called the EMCPA. First, I am a Negro Indian with indigenous rights, rights which have not been recognized, rights that are being denied under the orders promulgated under the EMCPA used to contain the virus being COVID-19. The suspension or derogation of certain civil and political rights is only allowed under specific situations of emergency that threaten the life of the nation, according to the UN, the United Nations. Even so, such restrictions on right must be legal, necessary, proportional, and they must not discriminate contrary to the provisions of international human rights law. The authorities have the burden of justifying restrictions upon rights. The authorities here have not justified the restrictions as one would expect in a free and democratic society. It is not clear that any of the restrictions, singularly or collectively, are effective. If they do not work, how are they necessary? For example, if wearing masks work, why are all of the other measures necessary? If vaccines work to protect those who want them, why are restrictions being imposed on travel and otherwise? Query whether the restrictions under the orders are legal, given the limited access that the public has to these laws during this pandemic, when libraries and other institutions are closed. Are the restrictions proportional and least intrusive? Not. Fundamental freedoms are being denied. The state is entering homes, threatening to separate children from parents, and imprisoning people who have committed no crime. Denying right to movement, the basis of freedom. Denying the right to earn a livelihood, eat, survive. How are these restrictions proportional to the threat from a virus from which the overwhelming majority recover? I'm not saying that we should not protect ourselves, for we should. Not saying those lives that have been lost don't matter, because they do. They all do. I have also lost a loved one during this crisis. Ashe. Not directly from the virus, but due to the effects of it. I am not saying that we should not protect ourselves. I am just saying how. We should all have a voice, a say. For the laws to be effective, they must be responsive to those they are meant to protect, and they must not discriminate. But the orders here do discriminate based on race, color, ethnic origin, and descent. They also discriminate based on religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, and other status. For example, the services that are deemed essential under the orders tend to be provided by those without means and by people of color. This results in more people of color and impoverishment being infected and being affected by the virus. This results in more people of color and impoverishment having to take the risk of vaccination and being vaccinated first without legal recourse in the event of harm caused by those vaccinations. The orders discriminate by not taking minority culture into account. This results in people of minority cultures not being able to practice their culture, their way of life, which has been necessary to the survival of us and our ancestors. For example, the orders limit gatherings, including for worship, to certain amounts that are not sensitive to the needs and practices of all, particularly those of us who rely on faith-based healing, church, and our large extended families to survive. By not taking minority culture into account, the orders promote non-compliance by such groups, thus reducing their effectiveness among such groups. The orders discriminate by showing preference to those with homes who tend to also not be people of color. For without a home, how do we follow the orders meant to protect us, the stay-at-home orders? And those without homes are more likely to be forced into isolation and other camps without access to windows or medical attention, left without access to fresh air and nature, forced to expose ourselves by being confined to places where there's higher rate of infection. How is this acceptable? The orders further discriminate based on a new status, positive or negative, for the virus. Those with the virus, often determined by unreliable tests, have fundamental rights denied and also lose the protection and benefits of the orders meant to save all lives. For example, those testing positive are forced to be away from their families. Children denied the right to travel, work, and denied their right to unlawful search and seizure of medical information by the authorities. This ultimately discourages testing and reduces the effectiveness thereof. And why? Why is the discrimination necessary, particularly in light of new vaccines available to those who are susceptible at their option? Why is this necessary when those susceptible can self-isolate and impose their own measures for their own self-protection, for the protection of us all? Because this affects us all. Finally, the orders discriminate against struggling artists and those with minority political positions. Outside of the internet, which is not available to all and not the most effective means of communication for all, how do we express our arts, our social and political views that are not held by the majority? Political views which must be heard for the laws to be responsive to the people and thus effective at saving us all, helping to save us all. The principle of equality and non-discrimination does not mean that all distinctions between people are illegal under international law. Differentiations are legitimate and hence lawful provided that they pursue a legitimate aim, such as affirmative action to deal with factual inequalities, and are reasonable in light of their legitimate aim. Here I question whether the distinctions pursue a legitimate aim. They rather seem to result in the value of certain lives over others. Certain groups are allowed to be exposed more than others. Who decides? The distinctions are also unreasonable, for what justifies allowing certain people to be fined, imprisoned, and ultimately exposed to a deadly virus more than others? In light of the foregoing, I ask that the orders cease to apply until they can be remedied. I ask for remedies, reparations, and compensation for their unjust application. I encourage us all to assert our rights in the international forum and otherwise. Lives are at stake. The future of our children is at stake. Peace.